So this video is going to look at the considerations to prevent injury. So what we can do when we're doing our different types of training to stop us getting injured. So there are certain aspects that are general to all types of training. So what that means is whether you're talking about fartlek, interval, weight training, plyometrics, all those types of training we've learned about, there are general things that can be applied to all of them when we're trying to think about reducing the risk of injury. And the first thing is that the training type or the intensity of training should match your training purpose. So if you're doing marathon training, for example, you're going to do continuous training, moderate intensity. You don't want to do really high intensity sprint training because that could potentially be working different muscles and putting extra strain on your body and result in a risk of injury. On top of that, there are other factors that can be taken into consideration when we're thinking of reducing injury. So a warm-up should always be completed. A warm-up is so important to prepare the body for exercise. It helps increase body temperature, increases your muscle elasticity, so you're less likely to pull a muscle. And we're going to be looking at warm-ups in a lot more detail in our next topic. Overtraining should also be avoided. And overtraining can mean different things. It can mean training too often, so your training volume is too large, or training at too high an intensity. And both of these things can put extra strain, extra pressure on the body, which can result in injury. Also, you've got to make sure that the clothing and the footwear that you're using when training is appropriate. So if you're going for continuous training, you should be wearing footwear that is cushioned. Okay, provides you with some cushioning because you're going to be doing an awful lot of impact on the floor. Taping and bracing is also really important. So no matter what type of training you're doing, you're going to be putting extra pressure on certain joints. And those joints should get an additional bracing around them to give them a bit more support during the training session. Hydration is also really important. We looked at this last year and we remember that 2% dehydration results in 10% decrease in your performance. And as you start to decrease your performance, you start to lose concentration, and then that can also impact and increase the risk of injuries. Stretches shouldn't be overstretched. So when you're bringing the muscle to the elastic limit, you shouldn't be going beyond that, trying to overstretch, because that's going to result in increased muscle tears. And also you shouldn't be bouncing while you're stretching. There's certain stretches called ballistic stretches where the athlete will bounce as they're stretching. And again, that's been shown to increase the risk of muscle tears, which is a type of injury. Technique use should also be correct. Okay, whether you're doing continuous training, weight training, whatever type of training you're doing, you've got to make sure your technique is correct. If you haven't got correct technique, then it's going to result in extra pressure and strain on certain joints and muscles, and that's going to result in an injury. And finally, you've got to make sure you've got appropriate rest between the different sessions. Okay, and even during the training session, having certain rests in between them if it's necessary. Okay, you've got to allow time for your muscles to recover between each of your training sessions. And if you don't, you're just more likely to increase the risk of injury. So there are certain aspects which are more specific and we can tailor to be more specific for the different types of training we're doing. So warm-up should be used to stretch the muscles that are being used in that session. So if you think about continuous training, you're going to be doing a lot of exercise with your legs. So you should be stretching your calves, your quadriceps, your hamstrings. But if you're doing weight training, focusing on your chest and arms, you should be stretching your biceps, your triceps, your pectoral muscles. Also, overtraining should be avoided. So we shouldn't be training really close to our 1 rep max in weight training because we're more likely to put more stress on our muscles and result in a muscle injury. At the same time, we shouldn't be running too close to our max heart rate when we're doing continuous training because you're going to be working at far too high an intensity, and that might result in an injury. We've also got to make sure that the clothing and footwear worn is specific to that type of training. So if you're doing continuous training, you've got to make sure you've got cushioned soles in your shoes because there's going to be a lot of impact. If you're doing weight training, your clothing shouldn't be really loose because if you're doing a bench press and you got caught on a loose vest, for example, then it's going to result in you maybe dropping the weight or using the incorrect technique, which can both result in an injury. Lifting and bracing has also got to be specific. So if you think about weight training, you should be thinking about the joints that can be used. Again, if we're working on our arms and chest, we should be taping up our wrists because that's going to be where a lot of the pressure is going to be on our joints. If we're doing long distance running or continuous training, we need to think about our knees, our ankles, because they're going to be put through a lot of impact during the training session. So they should be braced or taped up. Hydration is vital, okay, whatever type of training you're doing. But the type of training where you're going to be sweating a lot more, let's say continuous training because it's long distance, you're going to be sweating more. So you're going to need to consider hydration even more in those types of training. Technique's also got to be considered. So if you think about weight training, the clean and jerk, if you look it up on YouTube, clean and jerk for weight training is a common exercise that athletes get wrong. So they might be having a curved back while they're lifting the weight from the floor. And that sort of incorrect technique can put additional pressure on certain joints and certain muscles and can result in injury. Spotters are also required when you're doing weight training. Now, a spotter is a training partner who would, let's say you're doing the bench press and you're lifting a heavy weight. A spotter would be someone standing behind you who would just make sure if you did drop the weight, they were there to catch it and put it back on the bench for you. And also you've got to make sure that the rest stations are appropriate. So if we think about circuit training, we'd have to make sure that the time in between each of the stations was made appropriate to what we were focusing on. So it'd be different for a cardiovascular endurance circuit training compared to a power training circuit. You can see what I've done here is I've taken the general points from the last slide and made them specific to the different types of training we're doing. And that's really important. It's great to know the general points, but you've also got to be able to tailor them specifically to the types of training that we've learned on our course. And with that in mind, your homework is also going to include you writing 4 different points for circuit training, weight training, and continuous training. So how would you prevent injury in circuit training? 4 different points. How would you prevent injury in weight training? 4 points. How would you prevent it in continuous training? 4 different points. And you've got to make your answers really tailored specifically to the types of training that you're doing.